Today is my third sermon this year, and it is still on the prayer, Lord, save our children. It's been some time since I felt a special burden for our youth. It was when I came to the realization that I am in the church today because of the attention, because of the care that I was given by our ministers when I was young. It is because they treated me as if I were one of them. They gave me the importance that we are supposed to give to our young people, understanding that life moves on from us and they will have to take over the leadership of our church. And if we really care about this church, then we should care about its future. If we really love the church, we should become aware of the fact that life without us will have to be as good or even better than when we are here. Unfortunately, we have to adapt to circumstances in life, and we have to make an extra effort to educate our children even when circumstances are not very positive, which means having to work long hours for the parents so we can keep up with the livelihood of today, which means for ministers to travel long ways and for a long time, which affects our children. So considering these circumstances, we are not to find excuses, but rather make more of an effort to be able to save our children. We had studies on the general topic was Lord, save our children, and we talked about Abraham not being ready to have children until he was 100 years old because he was not mature enough, remember? When he was over 80 years old, he was about 87, he made the wrong choice, and that showed that he was not mature enough to have children. And when he was mature enough, he was 100 years old, and God gave him the child of the promise. And we talked about how each and every one of our children are the children of the promise because God has a purpose with every one of them. And therefore, He would rather not give us those children if we are not ready. So before we even consider having children, we have to get ready ourselves. We have to be mature enough to bring up children in this world. And then we talked about Lord, save our children before they are born, which means that from the Word of God we studied that it is important for the parents to take care of the children even before they are conceived, before they are born. They need to watch their diet. They need to make sure they are able to educate them at home. And then we studied about Lord, save our children when they are small. That was the third, and this is actually my fourth, not my third study this year. So when we considered the prayer, Lord, save our children when they are small, we concluded that God will not save them out of the blue, but He actually invites us to cooperate with Him to save the children, right? Jesus is the Savior of the world. Jesus is the Savior of our children, but He will not do it unless we cooperate. And actually, the Spirit of Prophecy says that God will choose the youth today as He used Daniel if we as parents cooperate with Him, right? So our children can be Daniels today if we cooperate with the Lord. And today we are going to talk about Lord save our children when they are teenagers, which is my favorite. You might have heard me speak about this before. There will be a lot of things that I meditated on, and God has brought them to my attention. And I actually started preaching about this subject when Clara turned 13. And we were in Brazil. That was the first time on the day she turned 13. We were at a missionary congress in Brazil, and there were about 4,000 people present. And that was the first time I talked on this subject so intensely, because I realized that the most difficult job of a parent is to be able to convince their children, not only to order their children, but to convince their children to stay in the church. The most difficult job, because we can order them to stay in the church, quiet even, when they are small, right? We just look at them and they are quiet. You know, somebody said today, one day, he said, you know, when my children were small, I would only look at them and they would be quiet. He wanted to say that was a good example to follow, which meant that the children were terrified when they were seeing the father's look, right? And so I asked him, how many of your children are in the church today? He has a few. And he said, none. When they are teenagers, that method doesn't work, not even temporarily, right? There are things that push us to be that rough with our children. And one of the things is reputation. We are so concerned with what people will say about us that we are treating our children as if they were the enemies, because they threaten destroying our reputation, right? And the moment they act in a way that will undermine our reputation, we treat them as the enemies. We say that they are the enemy number one, the enemies of our reputation. So we treat them really badly so that they will learn their lesson and they will watch the next time they have a chance. And I gave the example of another brother just because I'm proud to not give my example, because I tell you, in some moments I was the same. And I want to acknowledge it and to say sorry. I'm sorry to my children that sometimes I was so concerned about my reputation that I mistreated them. So let's talk about reality, if we are willing to face it. Proverbs 27:23 says, "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds." You know, some time ago, it was a few years back, I read this verse at a ministerial meeting. Sister Barbara was there, and she asked me if I could prepare an article based on this text, and I promised I would, and I never did until today. So the brethren decided that they will invite me to live in Roanoke by the office, so that being at the office, I will be able to write these articles, right? So having more time, hopefully one day, Sister Barbara will write an article on this subject. What does it mean to be diligent, to know the state of thy flocks? That means, just to take it in a simple way, I don't want to have a complicated sermon. I want us to get the points I'm trying to make by God's grace. Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds. That means our flocks are mainly our children, our family. What does it mean to be diligent to know the state of our children? Know their condition. Observing from far or near? From near. How near are we supposed to be to our children? Are we supposed to install cameras in the house to see how they behave? Are we supposed to learn from Facebook the state of their spirituality? How do we learn the state of our flocks? It says, be diligent. That means, this is my favorite time of the day is when we come for worship in the evening and we analyze the day. We talk to our children, we talk among each other, and we think about what we've done through the day. It is my favorite time of the day. Being diligent to know the state of our flocks means more than, hey, what are you doing there? Right? How long are you going to be there? Or come to worship, right? So it's not question and answer session, right? That's not how we know the state of our flocks. Knowing the state of our flocks is, sit down on the side of the bed and talk together. Let our children tell their story, right? They will tell you their frustration as well. Knowing the state of our, being diligent to know the state of our flocks requires a lot of time. We need to take a lot of time if we want to be diligent. It's amazing how many parents do not really know the state of their flocks. In some places, the ministers know better the state of the children of the church than the parents themselves. Because children come and talk to us as ministers, and they tell us what they really go through. And they tell us, I can't talk to my parents. And that's a very sad situation, that our children cannot talk to us, so they rely on the ministers to talk to them. We have a lot of seminars for the youth in teaching them how to obey their parents, how to be faithful to God, but we don't have enough seminars for the parents. Do we? I don't think so. Parents have to learn how to take care of their children so that they will not be in the situation to come to the ministers and say, please save my children, because they are going into the world. That will not be the situation. Today, in our Sabbath school, in our group, some statistics were mentioned as to how many young people leave the church. And it was mentioned over 60%. And actually, according to this statistic, between 70 and 88% of Christian teenagers are leaving the church by their second year of college. It's not the case in our church, but we are not too far off. And I'm not just talking about them staying or not staying in the church. I'm talking about them being enthusiastic about religion. Not only staying in the church because, that's how they learn to stay in the church, because we are not supposed to leave the gathering with the brethren, right? It's not just that, but be useful in the church, be enthusiastic about religion. How many of our children are that way? It's not only the fact that they stay in the church. How many of them are on the way to life everlasting rather than they are on the way of being just members of the church? We have to be concerned about this. So why are our youth going out? First of all, inconsistency. And I speak about myself. Inconsistency between the way I behave at the church and the way I behave at home. At the church, I may look as the most faithful person in the world, but then when I go home, I behave with my family as I shouldn't. That's the number one reason for which children are leaving the church is because of the inconsistency in their parents. They don't live at home as they live at church. Gossip. So we take off from church, and in the car all the way home we talk about the sermon, we talk about the minister who had the sermon, we talk about the way people dressed in church, about how much they ate, about everything, right? And our children are listening. We think when they are small they just converse between them, but they are listening to what we are speaking about. And then apathy that we manifest sometimes or all the time, which means we have no interest in religion. We just come to church because we have to, but there is no religion whatsoever outside of the church. We are apathic. We don't sing. We don't listen to music. We don't pray. We are not enthusiastic about things. We just do things out of routine. And the effect of our inconsistency as families or as a church, because as a church we also suffer from that, cannot be seen when the children are small. When children are small, they say poems. We think they are the most faithful children that you will ever see. But the effect of inconsistency is going to be seen in our children in their pre-teenage or teenage years. That's when you really see how our children were affected. It becomes obvious when they are pre-teenage or in teenage years. When they start making their own choices without fearing consequences, right? Is the moment when you tell your children, study your Bible or, right? So, out of fear for the consequences, they will suffer because they don't read their Bible. They read the Bible, so they don't suffer the consequences. But when the moment they are big enough to not be threatened with consequences, they will make their own choices, and they will tell you in your face, I'm not interested in reading the Bible. Right? And you can do nothing about it. That's when you really see how you educated your children. Again, be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks. So don't wait until they manifest it, right? And I always say, when our children get to that age when they can do whatever they want without suffering consequences, you will see changes in them. Changes that lead to, small acts of rebellion. They are testing the waters to see how you deal with it. We are surprised sometimes when our children rebel, because we were never diligent to see the signs for the beginning of rebellion. We were not diligent to see the signs, so we are surprised, and we as parents are acting out of place because we see our children misconduct. And they laugh in our face and say, this was a long time coming. You didn't even notice it. Because we are not diligent to know the state of our flock. But there was one man who was diligent in knowing the state of his daughter, and this is what I would like us to consider in a few minutes that we have left. Mark 5:21 and 22, we read again. And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea, and behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. Who was this man? He was a leader in the synagogue. He came to Jesus, and he fell down at his feet and said, my little daughter lieth at the point of death. That was his prayer, right? He was a Jew. manifesting faith in a Christian, right? He was the president of the local synagogue, and I'm pretty sure he had prejudices against Jesus because of the healing he had done on Sabbath.
Recently.
Yeah. But he was suffering now a tragedy. He was experiencing a tragedy, and when you go through a tragic moment, your perspective to life changes. You know, like some people, when they have a moment of trial, they stop attending church, right? You know, that's one of the examples that, I mean, you have a faithful person and then he goes or she goes through a tragic moment and you see that person totally changed. And this is what happened in Jairus' life. He changed in a positive way, but some of us change in a negative way. And the tragedy he was going through is that his little girl was sick and she was expected to die. How old was she?
12.
She was 12 years old. Right when she was a pre-teenager, right? Right before she became a teenager. Now, what happens when our children get in their pre-teenage years or teenage years? We feel sometimes that our children are dying when they get to that moment. Why? First of all, they stop talking. They don't talk so much. They are more introverted. They are hard to get out of bed, aren't they? Are they, Clara? I mean, some of them are hard to get out of bed even after the teenage years, right? Their only movement that gets faster is the movement of the thumbs. That's what gets faster for sure. They lose interest in family projects. Hey, we are going for a walk. Who is going with us? Not me.
I don't like it.
We want to build a tree house. Oh, man. Right? They don't participate at church as when they were little. And that's one of the signs that we should watch for. When we see our children not going there and grabbing the microphone like an ice cream cone, right? When you see our children not doing that, not showing interest, you have to be diligent because that's one of the signs that they are going away from being enthusiastic about religion. We have to inspire them to keep going. This is one of the reasons. Maybe some of you criticized me or my wife for, and sorry, Carlos, for allowing Carlos to come here and play violin with everybody else when he had just started playing violin. Right? You know, he didn't know how to play violin. He plays by ear, not by notes. But even though he is almost as tall as me, I am happy that he is going up there.
Amen.
I'm happy, and I encourage him to do so. Because the moment we tell our children that they are not ready, they are not ready to participate, they are not able to participate, we are actually pushing them away from the church. And they get bored easily, right? You do something and, suddenly you see them, looking at the phone on the side or doing something else. That's a sign that they are, being affected. And it's not always something bad, but we need to keep them enthusiastic. We need to keep them pushing. We need to keep pushing them towards being enthusiastic about religion. Did you take that picture already? Okay, sorry. Jairus was a preacher, right? And his daughter was a PK, right? Preacher's kid. As a preacher, I'm pretty sure he must have remembered about Abraham's case. What was his case? He was supposed to bring his son as a sacrifice. And when he had his knife above the child, God sent a lamb to save him, right? Now imagine, your daughter is 12 years old. She is lying on the bed ready to die. And you as a preacher who knows the Bible very well, you are meditating on God's promises, and you think about Abraham's case, and you start smiling when you think about Abraham's case, that the son was saved. Why? Because God sent a lamb, right? To replace him, to take the place of the child. And then you smile, and suddenly you remember again about your daughter lying there, and you look around, and there is no lamb for your daughter. Right? Isn't that tragic? To think of it. You believed all your life in that, in what the Bible says about Abraham, and now your faith is being shaken because God saved Isaac through a lamb. But you look around and there is no lamb for your daughter. It's not easy, is it? It's not easy. And then he hears the news. He hears the news that the lamb, the real lamb, is in town.
Amen.
The Lamb of God is in town. God made provision, actually. And he hears the news that the Lamb of God was in town. What does a father do? Oh, wait a minute. I'm a Jew. He's a Christian. Does he think about that? Wait a minute. I am a leader in the synagogue. My reputation is going to be affected by this. Is he going to think about that? No. A father who knows the state of his children, he is going to forget about everything and save his children, right? And save his children. I told you the other day that my children changed my life a few times. They saved me from disaster. I was so concerned about my reputation because, as a young man, when I was converted, my story was known throughout the country. I mean, God saved me from really the low bottom, and he made me a missionary, and everybody was amazed by it. And I wanted the momentum to keep going, right? What people say about me. And I was so concerned about doing everything and making the efforts and going an extra mile for the church that I was forgetting about my church, which was the home, the family, right? And I know that a lot of ministers go through the same thing. I know, especially the young ministers, when they are in the process of making an impact, when they are worried that every wrong step is going to affect them for life. And to be honest, it is true. If you don't fight for your reputation, let me tell you, sometimes in church hierarchy, you may suffer. I mean, you go down, right? So you have to fight for your reputation, and you fight so much. I mean, you don't dare do anything that the church would not approve, right? And sometimes it requires sacrificing your family. And I told you the story when Carlos was about 3 years old or 4 years old, and we had a great baptism. I mean, we were traveling as a family. I was dragging my children like 7 hours one way to study in this group, and then 7 hours come back. And we made a great effort 1 year going back and forth, and suddenly, finally 12 souls decided to get baptized. It was a new church. I mean, there was no members in that place. 12 souls decided to get baptized, and everybody was excited. We had the baptism. And at the baptismal water, Carlos, 3 years old, stepped into the water. And, some people believe that when you step into the water when there is a baptism, it's a sacrilege, right? You are stepping in the baptismal water. So the grandmother went to take him from the water, and he acted out, right? Because he was mad. There was the water. He was 3 years old. What do you want? I mean, So after the baptism, the people that I had baptized called me. And I thought, man, there is no need to say thank you. That's fine. That's okay, right? I mean, after 1 year going back and forth, preparing them for baptism, baptizing them, you expect them to say, it's been a hard year. I know you've made a lot of efforts. Thank you. So I thought, there is no need to say thank you. I just did my job, right? So they called me and they say, we observed the attitude of your son. And they rebuked me. They rebuked me. So it was then when I decided that God was first, family second, and church was third. I thought before that the church was God. From that moment, I decided that God was first, my family was second, and not the church. And I know I'm saying it from the pulpit of the General Conference, but, I don't want anybody to make the same mistake as I did, as I made. The church is not God. God is God. The family is the first missionary field, and the church is the third, and the world is the fourth, right? It changed me a little bit, but not totally, okay? Not totally. And coming back to our story, Jairus heard the news that the Lamb of God was in town. And that's amazing. I mean, when you look at it that way, it's just amazing. The lamb was in town, but there was a problem. Everybody else heard that the lamb was in town, and everybody had a problem. Everybody needed salvation. Everybody was around Jesus, right? And now Jairus, suddenly, he hears late, looks like, because by the time he got there, Jesus was already crowded, so he was a late comer. So he came in, it was busy, but he pushed through the crowd. He went to Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he said, "My daughter is lying at the point of death." He has seen Jesus before, probably, but he didn't want, he was not a disciple. He was mad at Jesus for the healing he had done on the Sabbath, but now it was his situation. You see, when it comes to us, we look at other people and we say, how can she do that, right? Or how can the father allow his daughter to dress that way? Now, don't we say that many times? And they say, wait until your daughter is that age. And you don't believe it until it comes. Yeah. You criticize others for doing certain things just because you are never in the situation to be tempted to do that thing, right? And you criticize the other person for doing something that you, in his place, would do. You just didn't have the chance. He didn't want his reputation to be affected. But now he forgot about everything else. All that mattered was for the daughter to be healed. He was desperate. He chose to save his daughter's life rather than his reputation, right? And I'm just imagining, right? The Bible doesn't say how he acted and how it happened, but I imagine that he was diligent in knowing the state of the daughter, and her colors were changing, right? Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen a person dying, but the color changes, the breath changes. So you see, when you are diligent to know the state of someone, you know how far they are from death. So he was still hopeful. He was holding his daughter. He was talking to her, trying to keep her awake, and the colors changed, and there is a sign that she was going to die. And this is why the prayer was, "My daughter is at the point of death," because he knew the state of the daughter. Don't you admire such a father? Today we live in the world in an age of absent fathers, don't we? And it's thrilling to see a father get involved in the life, especially in the life of the daughter. You don't see that too often today, right? So he decided to go to Jesus. And after pushing through the crowd, he got to him. Let me tell you something here. Children living in female-headed single-parent homes are 8 times more likely to go to jail, 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 20 times more likely to have behavioral problems, 32 times more likely to run away from home, 10 times more likely to do drugs, 9 times more likely to drop out of school. I mean, people say that it's okay if the children have parents of the same gender. It's okay, as long as they are 2, right? It's not okay. It's not okay. Children who are educated only by one gender are more likely, so many times, to go the wrong way. I'm not saying that circumstances in one's life mean that the family is doomed forever. No. God can work out miracles, right? If you are faithful to God, even if you are one, God can make out of your children what they are supposed to be if you are faithful to Him, right? If you are faithful to God and follow His plan. I believe in that. I believe that God takes care of circumstances. And He doubles His efforts, right? Or He capacitates the single parent to double his or her efforts to educate the children. But don't tell me that you, in a willing manner, you go into educating your child alone and you think you'll have the same success. You will not. Just because you choose to have a lifestyle, it doesn't mean that your child is going to be safe. Circumstances can change in one's life. It is true. But when the child is brought up by one parent alone, you have to double your efforts to save that child. You have to be a mother and you have to be a father at the same time. And that's not easy to do. So when fathers are, even if you have father and mother as a child, if the father is absent not physically, but mentally and emotionally he is absent because he works and he has to provide, the job of taking care of the children belongs to the mothers, right? Isn't that what men say? If a child cuts a little bit of the finger and goes to the father because, he is the strong man, the child goes and says, "Dad, I cut my finger." Dad is going to say, "Go to your mother." Right? Go to your mother. She will take care of that. Or the father comes from work and he says, "Oh man, I'm so tired." He sits on the couch and watches TV for 2 hours before falling asleep. Absent fathers, not physically, but emotionally and mentally, they are not there. And in verse 23, he earnestly says, "Please save my daughter." And I like this verse, James 5:16. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth how much? A lot, right? A lot. He was fervent. He wanted it. He was willing to risk his job in the sanctuary and the synagogue. He was willing to risk his reputation to save his girl. And he said, "I pray thee, come, lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live." Isn't that wonderful? And then in verse 24, Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. So Jesus started going, right? He started going, and the man was so happy, but there was traffic. And isn't that what happens, especially when you are not on time for a meeting or something, is when all the lights are red, right? All the lights are red, and oh man. Sometimes you take shortcuts. You go through a gas station, right, to cut the corner. No? Don't you do that? Brother Joe is listening. The traffic master. Do you do that? Now you have a new subject for next time, right? Talk about cutting the corners. The crowd were oppressed, and there came a lady and touched Jesus. And what does Jesus do? Stop. Oh, man. What does he do? He starts walking to the house, and suddenly he stops. Why does he stop? because a lady touched him. He didn't even know. And even though he knew who it was, he takes his time to ask, who touched me? Now imagine being Jairus. Your daughter is dying. And Jesus is stopping because of a lady. And he even asked, who touched me, instead of just saying, you are healed and let me go, right? No. He stays and he asks and he converses about it. And Jairus cannot hold his peace anymore. The lady came up. You know what the problem was? This lady had been suffering for as long as the girl was alive. The lady had been suffering for 12 years. And this was her chance, right? So from the moment that Jairus' daughter was born, this woman was suffering. And Jesus said, every soul is important. Remember when it came to Lazarus? Jesus tarried for 2 more days, knowing that there were 2 days of travel to go to the house of Lazarus. He stayed there for 2 more days. And then he said, this sleep is not for death, but is for the glory of God, so that God's glory may be manifested, and so you can believe, right? This was the same case. But don't say that to Jairus, right? Don't say that to Jairus, because he was desperate. He wanted his daughter to live. So there was this lady, and verse 34 says, Jesus said to the lady, thy faith has made thee whole. And then the worst happened. Now when the lady was healed, Jairus said, there is nobody else stopping Jesus, let's go. He sees his men coming. And this could only be bad news, right? They come and they say, look, don't bother him anymore. Your daughter is already dead. Don't say that to a dad. And then, you start to blame God. If he had rushed a little, if he had not stopped for this lady whose life was not in danger, she could have suffered for 12 more years, but my daughter was dying, right? All those thoughts come to your mind when you go through this. 2 Peter 3:9 says that the Lord is not slack concerning his promise. So he has something. He has something he was going to do. But, who would believe that in that moment? What does Jesus specialize in? Impossibilities. A bigger miracle could happen. And because of that miracle, many people would have a chance to believe even more, right? And as soon as Jesus heard the word, which word? Which word?
The messenger.
Of the messenger who said what?
She's dead.
Wasn't Jesus familiar with the word? No problem. Well, death, it's okay, it's a sleep, right? It's just a sleep. He said, be not afraid, only believe. I mean, what does it take? The same faith that you had to come out here, to ask me to heal your daughter, is the same faith that you have to exercise for me to produce another greater miracle. What's the problem? I mean, whether you believe that you'll be healed or you believe that you'll be risen, isn't that the same faith? Why do we limit our faith to possible things? Why do we limit ourselves to things that even we can do? I mean, even a doctor can do, right? Even a doctor can heal somebody with the right pill, we say. It's not real healing, but, I mean, they are heroes. They are heroes. John is looking, right? Now he is going to take me for a lecture, about how scientifically you can heal a person with a pill, right? Okay, so why do we limit ourselves to possible when God can do impossible things? I mean, you see your children already gone astray. You think it's impossible to bring them back to Christian life? It's possible. But that's the next study. The next study is going to be, Lord, save our children when they are astray, right? When they are already lost, what do we do? So Jesus said, be not afraid, only believe. And then he went to the house, and he suffered no man to follow him, save who? Peter and James and John, you know? He had his favorites, not because Jesus considered them favorites, it's because they were a real help. The others were just there to watch, right? So he only took what was necessary, right? So he went, and when he came in, he said unto those who were crying and sitting around, who would not believe, right? They said, why do you weep? He said, she is just asleep. And verse 40 says, and they laughed him to scorn. Why? They knew she was dead. I mean, there were some people there who were paid to weep, right? They knew what a dead person looked like. They were professionals, right? They started to laugh. How can you say that she is asleep? She is dead. We know this already, right? That's what a doctor would say, right, Johnny? You know, we know what a dead person looks like. You know, it's impossible. Because of their attitude, the crowd were not allowed to witness one of the greatest miracles. And this is what happens to us when we don't believe. I mean, not only are we in risk to lose eternal life, we also lose the privilege to watch miracles happen around us, just because we don't believe. We miss the opportunities. So, what did Jesus decide to do? You don't believe? Out. Right? You don't believe? Out. You won't have the privilege to see it. I mean, it looks like Jesus got there and he was in charge of everything, right? And this is what Jairus did. He said, Jesus, you are here, you take charge. You do everything you want. So he decided, you go in, you go out. You go in, you go out, right? He selected the people, he put them out. And this is what Jesus does when you put him in charge of your home. I mean, I know people who put Jesus in charge of their home, and the first thing they threw the television out of the window. Not Jesus, they did. But why? Because they decided in their minds that the television was taking away the time they needed to spend with Jesus. So they invited Jesus in through the door, the television went out through the window. And this is what Jesus does. When you put him in charge of your family, expect things to disappear from your home and from your life, from your habits. He will put them away. All influences, all factors that would hinder a miracle to happen in your home are going to be thrown away. If we want our children to be saved, what do we have to do? Invite Jesus to take charge of our home. But wait a minute. Because if we do invite Jesus to take charge of our home, he is going to throw away all our bad habits. If we want our children to be saved, we better listen to Jesus and we let him reform our lives. I went to this family once, an Adventist family. My wife was with me. She told me, my son is 17 years old. He has no interest in religion. Please save my child. So I said, well, let's have a study. Because I noticed some of the things that were happening in that family. So what did I study about with a young person and everybody else? I studied about the inspiration of Ellen G. White. I mean, the Ellen G. White as a prophet, right? Because I didn't see any books of Ellen G. White in that Adventist family, traditional Adventist family. So we had a study on the inspiration of the spirit of prophecy. And the 17-year-old was, listening and listening and listening. At the end, he said, look, I've been in the church for 17 years, but I've never heard of Ellen G. White as a prophet. And he said, does she have any books? And I said, yes, I will give you one. So I decided to give him the book, Messages to Young People. So I was talking to him about him reading those books, and the mother was hearing what I was talking about. And And then I hear her in the background speaking to somebody else and says, look, now he is confusing my son. Wait a minute, you asked me to save your child? But I realized she just wanted her child to come from the world into the church, but not from Satan to God. Right? She wanted him to come from the world into the church, and she was okay. So now I turned to her and I said, am I hearing correctly? And she said, yes, because now if he is going to read those books, he is going to give up meat eating. He is going to, and then he is going to impose to me to do that as well. So she was willing to have Jesus save the life of her child, but not her. But this is what happens when Jesus comes into the family. He wants to change everybody. Amen. And if you are not up to it, then don't invite him. Right? If you invite him, be up to it, because he is going to change your life. And he is going to make you what you want your child to be. Not only change your child. He took the damsel by the hand and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And what happened? What happened? She was saved. Because this man, this father, he was a preacher. The best thing he could do was to bring Jesus in the home. The best thing we can do for our children is to bring Jesus in the home. And be willing to be changed ourselves, so that our children will have a chance. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Whether it is about the education of our children that we are studying about in the lesson, whatever it is, if you decide, today I'm going to do this, if you do it in your own power, it's not going to work. If the Lord doesn't build the education system in your home, it's nothing you can do about it. So make sure it is God who does it. It is God who makes the changes in your home. We need to bring Jesus in our home. Kids need daddies who will lead out in Bible stories in the home, right? They need fathers who will call them to prayer meeting. We as fathers are the spiritual head of our household. Let's bring Jesus in our home. And to conclude, I would like to read this, because I used to believe that the greatest miracle the Lord could do was to save me from the world into the church. But now I believe that the greatest miracle actually is for God to convert our young people who are brought up in the church. That's the greatest miracle. Because I tell you, I grew up with parents who did not go to church that often. Orthodox church. I didn't expect them to be holy, but in the church, our children expect us to be what we preach that they have to be, right? They expect us to be what we tell them to be, right? And when they grow up with this inconsistency in the family, us saying something at the church, saying something different at home, gossiping about people in the church. I tell you, if a young person in the church is converted, it is a greater of a miracle than somebody coming from the world. And this is what I believe today. And this is what the Spirit of Prophecy actually says. Why should not labor for the youth in our borders be regarded as missionary work of the highest kind? It requires the most delicate tact, the most watchful consideration, the most earnest prayer for heavenly wisdom. To do what? To do what? To save our children. More diligence than working with somebody from the world. It requires more delicate tact than working with somebody in the world. Working with our children, it requires more. Why? Because they've seen too much. Right? They've seen too much bad example in us. If they will one day be enthusiastic about it, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And this is why ministers, parents, baptizing our young people is missionary work of the highest order. And the reason I wanted the teenagers to be here is because I wanted to ask how many of them are not baptized yet. But they are not all here, right? How many of the teenagers in our church are not baptized yet? And why? Why not? I hope that this sermon is going to produce in us what it is meant to, which is an interest in our youth. And since not all the youth are here, why not make an appeal to the parents? And I would like to ask, how many of us as parents are willing to do the simple thing of bringing Jesus in the home, with the risk of him cutting out our habits, cutting out our defects, cutting out in our own flesh what is not supposed to be there, so that our children will have a better chance of surviving. Why don't we make an appeal to the parents? And I would like you to rise, to stand, if you are willing to invite Jesus into your home, so that your children will be attracted by your religion and want to live such a religion themselves. Would you like to stand? So we have this special prayer for the parents in a special way. I believe time has come for us to look in the mirror and not say that, our children are that way because of somebody else, but look in the mirror and say, if my children will have a chance to be saved, it is if I accept the change God wants to make in me. So let's kneel down for this prayer.